Yeah.
So,
And it was kind of a funny forest there, though, because there were so many sinkholes around the area. I'm going to assume they were sinkholes. I don't know what they were.
I think we were kind of just wandering around. It was like
scared.
sunset, and someone was going to like use the restroom before we were cooking. And I think Kate was like, guys, look at this. And it was this like massive depression, and it maybe was like 3 or 4 feet deep. And then we found other sinkholes that we couldn't even shine the bottom with our headlamps. So I'm guessing they were more than 10 feet deep. Yeah. But it was really weird. Like, you'd just be walking along and like, boom, sinkhole. And you'd be like, well, can't go there.
I know. I was like, I'm really scared to go to the bathroom in the dark.
I know.
We wanna chase the night, wanna dance to the light, pull stars from the sky.
Hi, I'm Carrie.
And I'm Molly.
And you're listening to the Two Sisters on Adventures podcast. On Adventures podcast. This is the Timberline Trail Edition, Day 2. So we have woken up on a beautiful, clear morning where there's once again no wind, just like how there was no wind except for whatever wind almost blew our tent over.
Did you sleep very well that night?
I don't remember. I feel like I slept
I feel like I was so tired and I didn't really sleep as hard as I was hoping.
Yeah.
But what can you
do? And it's actually funny because I think Drew and Kate ended up sleeping in the shelter after all that. So,
and I was like, oh, where did you pitch your tent? And they were like, no, we just slept in there. It was great.
Straight inside.
Drew was like, yeah, there was a lot of interesting graffiti to read. So
that's funny.
You can stay entertained. And to my knowledge, they didn't have any animals bug them.
I don't think so. I think
no rats, no mice, no chipmunks.
So anyway, we got started with our day. We had our nice breakfast together. We just kind of tried to gather ourselves.
I, Carrie and I always do oats in the morning, and Kate she like will eat oat bran in the morning instead of oats. It's just like a different consistency. And so she made trail oat bran. She like got these like wonderful dried fruit mix. I don't know where she ordered it from.
Her mom gave it to her.
Yeah, and then she mixed it in with her oat bran, and she kindly made Carrie and I a bag of it as well. So we had our oat bran and fruit power breakfast.
Yes.
And it was really good. The only thing to note about the oat bran is it takes like twice as much water as oatmeal. Yeah. So it was quite the water needy breakfast. Anyway. But yeah, we just had a nice time. It was sunny. It was like a wonderful temperature, and we were kind of just like getting ready, getting in gear for our day.
Yeah, and I feel like at a certain point, Molly and I noticed that Kate and Drew were all packed and ready to go, and we were like, hang on. Why don't you guys just going ahead of us, because we're all going to like regroup together at Cloud Cap anyway, so it's not like we're worried about you going too far ahead of us. You guys can just get there and start doing your business, and then we'll catch up to you. So we let them go first, and then when we were ready to go, we left and we began our journey, and it was nice. It was a beautiful ridge, and it was nicer in the morning when I wasn't carrying the back half of a tent. And so
most things are nicer that way.
Yeah, well,
there was this one junction of the trail where I don't know if it was going to Tilly Jane or something, and we kind of took a left to go towards Cloud Cap, and then we were like, oh gosh, I hope Kate and Drew made the correct turn.
Yeah.
Or we're not going to see them for another day or two.
Not the best plan.
But they made the right turn, and so we rejoined them shortly before we got to Cloud Cap, and we made it to the campground. I think some people will camp there, which that's pretty convenient because you have water there, you have a toilet, so it kind of cuts down the time for those camp chores.
And to be honest, I was kind of bummed because I feel like everyone was like, it's so great, you can throw away your trash here, but there was no trash can. Yeah. And that's totally fine, I totally get it, but it was kind of like disappointing for me. Not that we had that much trash, but I was just like, wow, we're going to have to do a 3-day trip, and I'm going to throw away our trash on the first day, and it's going to be so amazing. And then it didn't happen, but that was also okay.
But yeah, once again, like we said last episode, the water there is so good. Like anytime you're filling
it's piped straight from the mountain.
Honestly, you kind of question like, is this going to be very good? But it was really tasty water. We didn't spend too much time there, but I think it took some time to kind of just refill all of our water and kind of get situated. And then we knew that I think we were less than a mile from Elliott Creek at this point, and for some reason, Carrie and I had kind of fixated on that one as
well,
being
that was
the
one that
challenging
people
one.
always said was very challenging, very difficult to cross. It's known for having banks that are steep and tricky to get down.
In fact, we'd met a gal the day before, and she was like, good luck on that Elliott Creek. I slid right down the bank. So it definitely is known for having like a fairly steep and unstable bank to get down and up from it.
Yep.
So yeah, Carrie
so
and
we
I,
really wanted to get to that one early. That was like half of the reason why we were going counterclockwise. So
Yeah.
that was our big goal. Yeah, so we just kind of got going, and it's like as you get to a creek, half the time you can just hear it getting louder and louder as you get there, and you're kind of like, oh man, I hope this goes okay.
I know, it's kind of the dramatic effect that always tends to happen, the echo that forms because of the like little kind of valley that it's in.
Yeah.
So we kind of went ahead from Kate and Drew because we were like, well, it's going to take us some time to figure out the exact situation we want for crossing it, so we can spend a little extra time. And so there's a couple blowdown you have to cross over as you switch back down towards the creek, and then you get there, and the side that we were on, the east bank, I feel like it wasn't
That was
quite
very
so
easy
tough
to get down to me personally.
We kind of climbed down and then traversed along the bank, and it was fine. Did two people just finish crossing it when we got
I think
there?
we saw two people were crossing upstream, and so we were like, well, let's go down and just investigate that. And they had found a good spot. There was like these two trees that you could kind of balance on to get to a bigger rock and then to go across. So it's kind of one thing where you really didn't even have to get your feet wet at that time of day, which it's interesting because I'm always like, oh, Elliott wasn't really that bad. But then when I think about the fact that we were there at 10:30, I'm like, if I got there at 6 p.m., I feel like I would think it would probably be kind of scary.
Yeah.
But I don't know that for a fact.
And
you know?
I think Carrie saw a video, and the same log that we crossed on was there, but the individual was crossing in the water, and it was like knee deep.
Yeah.
And it looked like everything was just kind of a little bit more swollen. But yeah, we basically did the 2 log crossing, and then there was this one little step that we had to do across a channel. But I think we pretty much rock hopped the whole way across. But we must have spent a good probably 15 minutes analyzing it.
Yeah,
it was kind
we
of
wanted
time.
to make sure everybody had a good time.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And then when it came to climbing up the banks, there were some people heading down, so you could kind of see where they must have hopped
There's
off the
really
trail.
no trail up that embankment because it's so sandy and eroded that every year it's going to erode. I mean, they could waste time trying to chip a trail into it, and the next day it'd probably be gone.
Exactly. And I think there are cairns on the west side to know when you should climb down the bank versus just like continuing down the trail. So there was like a little bit of a frightening moment for me. I led the way, kind of climbing up the embankment, kind of on all, like, you know, hands and feet. And I put my hand on this one rock to steady myself, and that rock felt like it was like a teeter-totter. Like if I would put any more weight on it, it would just slide right down. And that rock must have been, I mean, it was probably 2 feet long and 2 feet wide or so. And it looked like it was something that could weigh like a couple 100 pounds. And I just thought, oh man, like all it would take is just like unearthing a loose rock to roll down into other people, and that could be really scary. So,
and that is one good thing to have as a consideration. I feel like I tried to space us out so that we weren't like, you kind of can go diagonal to each other and not be directly behind another person. But then it's also tough because I like to see what the person ahead of me is doing so that I can decide if I like or don't like their way. And so sometimes you can get caught up in watching what that person is doing, and you need to also just keep in mind, like, I probably should never be directly down from someone on a bank that's that rocky because the rocks, I mean, are just going to cascade down. Like, we saw another girl, remember, she was kind of trying to go down on her butt, like butt scoot down, and it was like just falling and falling.
I know. And so it seems like if you are going clockwise, that west bank is a little bit tricky to descend because it's steep, but it's totally doable. You just have to take your time and pick a good route.
And I would say just consider who's below you.
And one other consideration is, so often I think when you're scrambling, you try to find rocks and use those rocks as stable places to step, but it almost seems like you're better off trusting the embanked sand than like picking rocks to use as points to pull on or push on or land on, because the rocks are actually kind of unstable. So just take your time and it goes perfectly fine. So guess what? We crossed another creek, so I guess we're going to be going uphill for a while. This was a spot that was affected by wildfires, and I don't know how long ago the fire was that affected those northern slopes of Mount Hood. It's been a while.
It was quite a while ago. It was before I moved there, I want to say.
Yeah.
So it might have been like 2012. Who knows? So as we ascended, we kind of got into a burned area, so you got to do kind of a
double whammy of both ascending and then also climbing over and under trees. But I think we made pretty good time, and we just kept chipping away at it. And at one point, I think we saw like a man and his children kind of going about it, and they were doing awesome.
And honestly, there was a little bit of gymnastics required. It wasn't the worst gymnastics I've ever had to do, but I feel like sometimes when I'm just like annoyed at stuff, I don't want to lift my leg as much, and so I did actually end up with a pretty good scrape on the back of my leg.
Always do that.
Yeah, I got lazy.
Oh, and I think at that point we were mostly in the shade of the mountain, so it was pretty comfortable.
Well, after the uphill.
Yeah.
The uphill was all exposed and sunny and dry and hot and dusty. And then we curved into the mountain.
Gotcha. And so
got the shade.
We had kind of accelerated, and we paused to kind of wait for Kate and Drew, and we figured they were somewhere in the vicinity, so we kept going. And then we got to this kind of really nice little brook that was flowing across the trail. Super chilly, beautiful water, beautiful flowers. So we thought, let's just wait here for Kate and Drew. And I think we must have waited for like 45 minutes, and we were like, oh gosh, like where could they be? And then they just came like just popping down the trail, and it turns out they'd taken their rest break probably,
like around the other curve.
Yeah, like not even 300 feet behind us.
Yeah.
So we were taking parallel rest breaks.
Yeah, and that area was really cool because wherever there's water, there's life always in the mountains. And so it was just like this beautiful, cool waterfall, and then just so many flowers. There were these ones that I think somebody called them monkey flowers. We don't know if that's true. He said, I'm taking a picture of them because they're for my little monkeys, my grandchildren. I was like, oh, I don't know if that's the real name for them or not. But it was just fun because it's like you would look upstream and it's all these beautiful colors, and downstream, and then like it was just kind of more foresty all to the side. So I kind of always feel like I love how like water is just life in the mountains, and you always have that really beautiful area like that.
Totally.
So the next creek that we were going to cross was the one that I was absolutely the least concerned about. On every list I've read, it is no big deal. It's the last one in terms of difficulty. Elliott, White River, Sandy, they're all at the top, and then Newton, Ladd, Clark, blah, 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 and Coe Creek was always at the very bottom for everyone. That was not our experience. So Coe Creek, we got to about 1:30, and I feel like, as we were coming down, I can hear it, and it's getting louder, and I'm not worried because I knew it was going to be a creek crossing. We'd done so many that day. We'd probably done like 3 or 4 already by then. And I mean, honestly, I feel like it was one of those moments where you're just kind of like, yeah, no big deal. And then we were spat out right to where the stream was. And I kind of was like, oh, okay. So I'm going to have to be taking this one seriously today. Coe Creek was running so hard. I mean, the current was extremely fast. I could tell. I think I put my pole in right where he came out because I was like, oh, if this is super shallow, then we're just going to walk right across. And it was deep. And I mean, like, probably like over like shin deep, I'd say, from what my pole said. And then it's like it was too wide to just step across because it was like kind of this very smooth lava rock on either side of where the trail popped in and out. And so right away I was just like, oh shoot, this was like not even on my radar for being an issue because no one had said it was. And so I think right away we said, okay, well, Molly and I are here first, so that's a good thing. We'll spend some time figuring it out. So we kind of started going upstream because the downstream basically was just directly into the water.
Yeah,
there was no downstream.
So basically
it was this embankment.
Yeah, the spot the trail spits you out at, we've seen a picture of it when it's not flowing quite so high.
Yeah.
And it's like you wouldn't even get your foot wet. You would just step across maybe like a 2-foot wide little section of water. But in our situation, it must have been like 4 or 5 feet wide. And like Carrie mentioned, it was kind of like fire hosing through. Yeah. And it was also
a pinch point.
Really smooth rock. Yeah. And I didn't step on it enough to see how slippery it was. But I just know, like in Yosemite area, when the rock is smooth, it's slippery, and I just don't love that. And like Carrie mentioned, there was no run out because it was basically a waterfall right after it. It's the Coe Falls. Yeah. A little further down the trail.
Like you can't see it, but it's like it kind of just was
a drop off.
Yeah, it just ran you out,
So didn't love that. So we started going upstream a little bit. Did we wait for Kate and Drew, or did we kind of search it out?
I think we were like, we're gonna just take a look at this. Yeah.
So, and it was kind of like bushy, so you had to like kind of hold onto the bush
because you don't want to fall into the river.
And you're like on rocks, but then you're kind of like leaning into the bush. and hoping it doesn't push you over
Yeah.
because you could just go into the creek. And so we found this area that I think that there was like a log, and it was braided out a little bit more, like it was constant water, but there were some more rocks you could kind of hop across. So we felt like, okay, I think we could make this work. So then we went back down, and then
They came like right after that.
yeah,
which was
sat
great.
there, analyzed for a minute, and
Yeah.
realized that we didn't even take any pictures of it. And I
Yeah.
think anytime that I get a little stressed, and once again,
Or if
it's a
I'm
good
in a
stress.
serious where I'm,
Yeah.
if I'm in a situation where I'm more serious about what I'm doing, like
Yeah.
versus where I'm like, oh, I know I can make it across because I can see 10 different points. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? But if it's like a spot where I'm like, I really need to focus up,
I'm
we
not
don't
just
take
like taking pictures
Yeah,
and
selfie.
videos, so there's not a good representation of it, unfortunately. But Kate and Drew came on out, and we said, okay, I think we're going up this way. And it's always, I don't know, kind of a blessing, I feel like, when we get to little elements like that, and then you see someone on the other side,
Yeah.
and you know, like, okay, they're
Someone
like
else is figuring it out
working
too.
it through from the other way, and we're just gonna kind of like meet and see what each other does. So it wasn't terrible. We did some rock hops, and we probably made it a good like 15 feet across
Yeah.
the creek, and then there was this big rock, and then this last big step that must have been probably
Yeah.
4 feet
Yeah.
long or something, across another pinch point. And so we investigated it and tried to decide if we could kind of wade through. And the gal on the other side, she did offer, I think, her
Yeah.
hand to me, and I don't think I needed it in the end. I
I
just
don't
decided
remember.
I was just gonna kind of like take a
Commit.
big step and leap,
Yeah.
which is just basically a big step. And I did it, and it was fine. So then Carrie did the same thing.
I think
Kate
you
and
grabbed my
Drew-
hand. But yeah, for Kate and Drew, they were like, well, we would just rather just take the steps in the water. And I was like, honestly, that's fine, because even then they could like hold our pole.
Totally.
And then we could help pull them
Yeah,
onto the
so
rock.
it was like, I want to say it was
I
well
feel like
over
it was
knee deep.
Yeah, it was deep for her.
But then we had kind of a hand.
But it was really
and-
one step, I think.
Yeah, one step, and it was fine. But
Yeah.
I want to say that took a chunk of probably like 25 minutes of
Yeah,
our
it took
time
quite a
just
bit of
trying to
time.
figure it out.
Mhm.
So actually, you know, the creek crossings, once again, they kind of break up the day
Yeah.
because it's not a rest break because mentally you're working, but you're not walking necessarily. And then once you're done with it, it's such an empowering
Yeah.
feeling and almost a little bit of an
Adds a little
adrenaline rush.
spice.
It just does. I love trails with creek crossings.
I
It's
know,
very
it is actually
fun.
pretty fun. Yeah, so we did which again, not on my radar at all
No.
as a concern, but one of those things where it's like, I guess probably each of those rivers can get bad at some point, just
Definitely.
depending on, I
And
don't even know what
I
factors.
definitely hadn't factored that one in because I thought I'd be eating my lunch by then.
Yeah.
And we were, I think, a mile and a half or so from Elk Cove. So we kind of wanted to eat our lunch there. And
Yeah.
we kind of congregated as a group and decided we were okay to do
Yeah.
that.
Plus, there was like no good resting spots in that. area.
Definitely. So we had one more burn section to walk through, and that was warm.
Yeah.
Carrie and I enjoy
And pretty.
wearing. Oh, it was pretty, but it was hot. So we like wearing sun hoodies, and it's nice to just throw your hood on and really minimize what the sun is hitting on
Yeah.
your body at that point. And then we made it to Elk Cove with a fabulous view of Mount Hood, so many wildflowers, and then just this icy cold creek that I did dip my legs in for a minute, and it was amazing.
So at that point, it was kind of fun because we had decided that we were just going to lay at that nice little break spot and look at the mountain for a little bit, and Kate and Drew could go on ahead. And I think we just kind of had this like understanding with them that if it was like any weird sort of intersection in the trail, they'd wait for us. And, you know, it was just like, you know, they were doing fine and we were doing fine, and we are a little bit faster than they are, but they're also a little bit quicker to get going. So
Yep.
it kind of evened out very nicely.
Yeah.
So we just really enjoyed
Oh, that
those
was
meadows.
a beautiful hour where we just laid there
Mm-hmm.
and like closed our eyes.
Yeah.
It's kind of funny because we wanted to be in the meadow
I know.
by the creek where you can see Mount Hood, but there's not very much shade.
Yeah.
So we found this one tree, and then we just laid in the shadow that the tree
Yeah.
created. And it was so relaxing.
Yeah.
It felt great. And at some point we had to get up and keep walking because that's kind of why we were out there.
Yeah,
so
more or less.
we did just that and started to ascend, and that was one of the really epic views, I feel like, of Mount Hood. Was it Western Pass
I think
that were on the hillsides?
Which
Another
are the Dr.
really
Seussian
cool
looking flowers.
flowers. So there's this hillside with Western Pass, the mountain
Yep.
behind us. So that was just beautiful.
And then one really special thing happened. We saw avalanche lilies. This is a flower that I wanted to see for forever, and it's a lily that only appears for like 1 or 2 weeks when the snow melts. And so for whatever reason, I've just never been in the right spot at the right time, but you sometimes will go places and see just like, like a whole ridge of avalanche lilies. And I've always thought, oh, I really want to get out there and see those when they're blooming. But I never had. And we were just walking along and I was like, what are these weird looking flowers? Because when avalanche lilies die, they become this weird looking shell of themselves. And so we kept being like, these are the weirdest flowers I've ever seen. And then we got to a spot where they still had their petals. And I was like, oh my gosh, I think these are avalanche lilies. And so anywhere where the snow took longer to melt, like in depressions in the ground or shaded areas, was just so many avalanche lilies. And I was just so hyped because I feel like that was kind of like a bucket list thing. And I got to share that with Kate and Drew and be like, look at this, guys. This is really unique.
And this is a higher little section of the trail. It was like 5,800 feet where the avalanche lilies were. And I just thought it was so gorgeous because it was a really kind of subalpine area that I don't feel like there's a ton of places in Oregon because it's not quite as high elevations or it's drier that have this terrain. But this area kind of on the northwest, like the north and then the northwest side, was just so beautiful. The trees, the views, just the clearness of the air, the flowers that we saw.
The creeks were so clear and deep.
It was beautiful.
And it was very just like high alpine vibes. It was super pretty.
And I think that's kind of in the like McNeil Point area where we even walked past the area where you could junction and head up to McNeil Point. And I think some people do go up there and you can kind of add on a route that parallels the trail but at a higher elevation and then drops back down to the Timberline Trail, I do believe.
And so there were some more creek crossings that day as well. I actually kind of forgot about them until we were talking about this, in that area with the bear grass, and we saw that man and his daughter and they were hiking out, and so it's just a really neat area. But one thing that was cool is there's so many expansive views of the mountains. But in 2020, there was this huge windstorm that started kind of, or pushed along the wildfire that devastated the Mount Jefferson wilderness. But it also, we hadn't realized, created these huge swaths on the ridges, on the northwest, facing ridges of Mount Hood, where all the trees were just knocked down. And it was the craziest thing to see because we're kind of walking along this ridge and I looked across and I was like, what happened over there? Like, all of the trees are just wiped out. And then we actually looked on the right side of the ridge we were walking on, and if you looked, all of the trees were like at an angle, and it was so weird to see because to our left are these tall, perfectly healthy standing trees. To our right are all the trees that are just totally leaned over. And I was just like, that is crazy to see the power of wind, because they had 70, 80 mile an hour winds.
It was gale force winds.
Inland.
Exactly. And I mean, I think it had blowdown effects in a lot of places. I remember hiking in the Mount Jefferson wilderness and just like clumps of trees obstructing trails and being like, what is happening?
It just like uprooted even like 150-year-old trees.
So it was just very fascinating to see kind of bird's eye view from this ridge and see it on our right side and across the way as we continued to walk. And at this point we were descending a ridge kind of towards, I think it's called Bald Mountain, which is an area Carrie and I had hiked before as a day hike. And there was no blooming bear grass, but it was the like long bear grass that was along the trail, and the sun was in the sky at this like beautiful angle, and it was just like beautiful golden light that it was really enjoyable. And around that time we met a guy and a gal who were hiking together, and they were doing the Timberline Trail. And just
gonna preface this, there was a section that had been closed for 3 years since the 2020
Muddy Fork area, right?
windstorm, and Yoakum Ridge, and it had been recently kind of reopened, like go at your own like risk. We've cleared some of the trees, but not all of them. And I was just really debating. I wanted to go there, but now you can tell the story.
Oh, and I'm gonna pause for just a second. I think you'd read an article. How many trees had they cleared from that area? Was it I don't remember. 1,000?
There were hundreds and hundreds of trees. It was like an unbelievable amount.
They had cleared so many at this point and reopened it.
And it was still not tree free.
So we saw this guy and gal. We visited a little bit, and I think we asked if they did the Muddy Fork, or if they did like the detour,
alternate.
which is the alternate as the PCT
Yeah.
for that section. They said, no, we did the trail, but it took us hours and we were just crawling
Yeah.
under and over trees and it never ended.
Yep.
And at that point, Karen,
I was like, you made the decision for me.
yeah, we're
Because we were already a little bit behind of time. You know, we were running a little behind, and it was like, nope, just nice to know to check that off.
And
not go
honestly,
there
I
that
feel
time.
like we didn't actually know where our campsite was for this day, because we kind of hoped that we'd find something that we liked in the Muddy Fork area,
Mhm.
but it also we weren't familiar with really any good campsites
Yeah.
in that area.
Plus, I was getting a little bit nervous because there was a lot of PCT hikers. I feel like there's not normally quite so many PCT hikers there in July, but so many people skipped the Sierras
Mhm.
and had started southbound from the terminus in Washington that we were seeing a lot of PCT hikers. And I started thinking, oh my goodness, I wasn't even considering having to compete with like the whole class of 2023. I thought like, oh, maybe we'll see like a few southbounders that will have made it here by the end of July, you know, because commonly it's not good to start until like mid-July southbound, you know what I mean? And so I was not calculating at all that there was going to be like the entire class of
Yeah.
2023 is going to be going through Mount Hood at that time. But we were seeing so many PCT hikers. And so we were just kind of going down, and I started thinking, oh my gosh, I think we need to like speed it up because we need to get there. And I was like, oh, we're going to have to cross the Muddy Fork. But then when I looked at my Guthook app, there was this little comment that was like, don't worry, guys. There's a gigantic tree that it literally anyone can use to cross this river at any time. It's like God put it there as a bridge. And honestly, it was such a cool tree. I
Yeah.
doubt I took a picture of it because I don't know what's wrong with me.
Yeah.
But it was a perfect crossing
Yeah,
point.
and so it was, you know, when we visited with the couple, we were still a little bit away from Bald Mountain. So we had a couple miles that we took to rejoin with the PCT. And then I think we walked along the PCT for probably 2.5 or 3 miles to then get to our campsite. So
Yeah.
Carrie had, you know, used Guthook to figure out, okay, there's a spot right on the Muddy Fork that we can camp. And before we crossed the river, all the campsites were full already.
Yeah.
And then when we took that beautiful log bridge, we had a wonderful pick of many campsites to choose from. And the Muddy Fork River is actually really cool. Its glacial coloring is pretty brown,
Yeah.
giving it that muddy color. But I don't know. I feel like I've started to enjoy that color of river more and more
Yeah.
as time goes on. And so that's not the best spot to fill with water, once again, because of the glacial flour. So we had filled up with water.
Oh,
There
good
was a
for us.
spring about a mile prior to hitting the
Nice.
Muddy Fork. And so we had like this just like dribble of water off of moss, and we'd filled up everything that we needed at that
Good
point.
for us.
Yeah.
I forgot about that.
Yeah, and it was a nice water source once again. So
Yeah.
way
So
to
then
go, Mount
we
Hood Wilderness.
got there, and it's kind of an interesting area because it's where some people access Ramona Falls from. So I feel like we saw a few day hikers, and I was like, wow, how weird to see day hikers.
Yeah.
And they were, yeah.
It was a nice area to pitch a tent because it's
amazing.
this mossy
Soft,
forest. It's
quiet.
so weird because when I first started hiking and backpacking, I thought the ultimate campsite was like a ridge area with like a good view. But I think my favorite campsites of all are in the like old growth forests where I can pitch my tent on a really mossy surface, and it's just like I love that so much.
Yeah.
So,
And it was kind of a funny forest there, though, because there were so many sinkholes around the area. I'm going to assume they were
the
sinkholes. I
first
don't
one
know
we
what
found,
they were.
I think we were kind of just wandering
I was like,
around. It was
I'm
like
scared.
sunset, and someone was gonna like use the restroom
Yeah.
before we were cooking, and I think Kate was like, "Guys, look at this!" And it was this like massive depression, and it maybe was like 3 or 4 feet deep. And then we found other sinkholes that
Yeah.
we couldn't even shine the bottom with our headlamps, so I'm guessing they were more than 10 feet deep.
Yeah.
But it was really weird.
It
Like
was
you'd
kinda
just
creepy.
be walking along and like boom, sinkhole, and you'd be like, "Well, can't go there."
I know. I was like, I'm really scared to go to the bathroom in the dark.
I know.
But
So
it
that was like our
that was the
sinkhole
one weird part
campsite.
about it. Yeah.
But other than that, it was like an awesome spot to pitch a tent.
Mhm. And it was really fun too because I feel like we just had such a good night in camp that night. Like we were all like really just visiting and having fun.
we
We'd
had-
done over half the trail.
We'd seen multiple PCT hikers like just during that 3 mile stretch on the trail. And this one guy walked past our campsite and we were like, hey, do you want some chocolate? And he was like, nah. And then we were like, it's from Belgium. And he was like, you know what? Okay.
Yeah.
And he was really cool. But
So,
we didn't
it
chat
was
with too many of them, but it's just fun to see.
a good end of the day, a weird campsite, but an awesome campsite.
Honestly,
and
great.
then honestly, we all had to laugh for a while when Kate got into her bivy tent because it's just a funny sight to watch someone crawl into a bivy tent and then you're like, it's kind of creepy in there. Thank you so much for listening to another episode of the Two Sisters on Adventures podcast. If you want to see pictures or videos of what we talked about today, you can follow us on Facebook or Instagram at Two Sisters on Adventures. Or for the video version of the podcast, you can find us on YouTube, which is a pretty normal place to find a video podcast. So tune in next week to hear about our last day on the Timberline Trail. That came quickly. Thanks so much for listening.
And if you like what you're hearing, please feel
can-
free to rate and review on the podcast platform of your choice.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.